Have you ever made a choice not because you wanted to, but because you had no other way to save the ones you love? Imagine signing a marriage contract with a man who doesn't believe in love, who only sees you as a solution to a public image problem. No vows, no tenderness, just a silent exchange of names and a house with too many rooms and too few words. What would you do if one night he reached for you not out of duty, but with something real in his eyes? Would you dare believe him? Or would you protect your heart and walk away from what might finally be true? This is the story of Ava Warner, a woman who gave up her freedom to rescue her family's legacy, only to find herself rediscovering her voice through metal, memory, and the art of beginning again. It's not a love story. It's a story about the space between breaking and blooming. If this touched something in you, if it made you pause, please like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, because sometimes all it takes is one story to remember who we really are. Now, let's begin. She stood at the edge of the Blackwood estate, her suitcase in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. A soft breeze rustled the ivy crawling up the stone walls, but inside her chest, everything was still. Ava Warner had just agreed to marry a man who didn't love her. The paper in her hand wasn't a love letter. It was a contract, a legally binding agreement with terms laid out as plainly as a business merger. 5 years, no intimacy, no emotional involvement, no interference in each other's lives. She had read it 3 times. Each line felt like a door closing, but she signed it anyway. Now she was here, standing beneath a marble archway at the entrance of a life she had never imagined for herself. The air smelled of jasmine and fresh polish. Even the silence seemed rehearsed, like everything in this place had been told what not to say. A butler opened the door with a nod. No words, just protocol. Inside, the house was grand. High ceilings, polished wood floors, chandeliers that didn't sparkle, they declared. As she walked in, her shoes clicked too loudly on the floor, as if even her footsteps didn't belong. She had dressed simply, a cream blouse tucked into a navy skirt. It wasn't fancy, but it was respectful. She didn't want to appear needy or glamorous. She just wanted to appear appropriate. She was shown to a room on the west wing. Her things had been delivered in advance. The room looked like something out of a magazine. Beautiful. Perfect. Cold. Not a single photograph. Not a single misplaced pillow. A room made to impress, not to rest. She stood in the middle of it and whispered, "What have I done?" No one answered. She met Ethan Blackwood only once before agreeing to marry him. He had been polite, distant, wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit like it had been made for no one else. His expression had remained unchanged throughout the meeting. He didn't ask her about her dreams. He asked if she understood the clauses, if she needed legal representation, if she had any conditions of her own. She had none. What she had was debt, a mountain of it, left behind by her late father, along with a vineyard that was slowly slipping through her fingers. Her mother's health was fragile, her own future uncertain. Ethan's offer had arrived like a lightning bolt through a dark sky. It wasn't love. It wasn't rescue. It was a solution. He needed a wife, a quiet, respectable presence, someone who could play the part, appear at events, say the right things, smile on cue, and he would pay off her debts in full, immediately. She hadn't said yes right away. She went home, stared at the ceiling for a week, then returned to the lawyer's office and signed on the dotted line. She remembered the moment well. Ethan had been flipping through pages, calmly, like it was any other business deal. When it was her turn, she paused for just a second. "You don't have to do this," he had said, not looking up. "But if you do, understand, I don't change rules. Not halfway through." She had nodded. "I understand." But standing now, in this cold, beautiful room, she wasn't sure she understood anything. That evening, a knock on the door startled her. "Miss Warner, Mrs. Blackwood." The housekeeper corrected herself with a faint smile. "Dinner is served at 8. East Wing dining room. Formal attire." Ava nodded. Her voice stuck somewhere behind her ribs. She stood in front of the wardrobe, staring at the options that had been selected for her elegant, tailored, neutral. She chose a soft gray dress with long sleeves and a modest neckline. As she dressed, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes looked uncertain, not sad, just untethered, like a balloon someone let go of too early. She fastened a simple necklace, her mother's, a small sapphire pendant with a worn clasp. "I'm doing this for you," she whispered. "For us." Then she walked out of the room and into the rest of her life. Before she became Mrs. Blackwood, before the contract and the silence, her name was just Ava Warner. She grew up in Sonoma County, California. Her world smelled like earth and ripe grapes, like dusty barns and morning rain. Her father, Daniel Warner, ran a small vineyard with bare hands and honest sweat. He taught her how to walk barefoot through the rows, how to tell when a grape was ready just by its color. Her mother, Claire, used to laugh in the kitchen while canning jars of peach jam, humming old country songs that never quite left Ava's memory. Their home wasn't big, but it was warm. And more than that, it was safe. There was no staff, no chandeliers, just creaky floors and a porch swing that never stopped moving in the wind. She was 17 when the first crack appeared. Her father collapsed during harvest season. Doctors said it was his heart. He survived that time, but something in him dimmed. He slowed down. The laughter faded. Bills started to pile up. A late frost ruined that year's yield. Then a supplier pulled out, and then another. By the time Ava turned 22, the vines were still standing, but the life around them was crumbling. Her father passed away on a quiet morning in April. He was sitting in the old armchair by the window, a mug of untouched coffee in his hand. That day, something inside Ava broke softly, quietly, like a glass falling onto thick carpet. She tried everything to keep the vineyard afloat. She spoke to banks, tried to refinance, reached out to friends who no longer returned calls. Every day, she watched her mother grow smaller, not in size, but in spirit. Claire stopped cooking, stopped singing. Her hands trembled more often. Her memory began to slip. Ava had never felt so responsible and so powerless. She worked part-time at a local art store, selling sketchbooks and brushes to people chasing dreams she no longer believed in. At night, she stayed up running numbers, staring at spreadsheets with red cells and blinking warnings. By dawn, she'd brew coffee, kiss her mother on the forehead, and go out to check the vines. She didn't cry. Not much. Anyway, She kept going, because that's what her father would have done. Because stopping meant losing everything. And then the offer came. It arrived in a white envelope, delivered by courier. No return address. Only her name written in bold black ink. Inside was a letter, clean and direct. Mr. Ethan Blackwood had heard about the Warner estate. He was offering a solution. Full debt payment, discretion, and in return, a marriage 5 years. No expectation of intimacy or affection. A legal arrangement to benefit both parties. The letter was signed not by Ethan, but by one of his lawyers. She thought it was a scam at first, but when she called the number, a real voice answered, a real man, with a tone so calm it unnerved her. "We can meet," he had said. "You'll be safe. No pressure." She went, out of desperation more than belief. Ethan Blackwood met her in a glass office high above Manhattan. He didn't smile. He didn't flirt. He just asked if she understood what was being proposed. "You would live at the estate," he said. "We would appear at events. No physical involvement. You would have access to the things you need, but we live separately. You'd be protected, respected, and after 5 years, free, with a future secured." She asked him why. "Because I need stability," he said simply, "and you need a way out." She didn't respond. There are no expectations, Ava, only rules. That night, she sat in her old bedroom back in Sonoma, her feet curled under her, the contract in her lap. Her mother slept down the hall. The mortgage was due in a week. She stared at the paper and thought, this isn't marriage, it's mercy. But maybe mercy was enough. Ava wasn't naive. She knew what people would say if they found out, knew the looks, the whispers. But no one else had come forward. No one else had offered help. Only him. So she packed her things, said goodbye to the vines, and got on a plane headed east. She didn't cry at the airport, but when the wheels left the ground, she whispered her father's name and hoped he'd forgive her. Ethan Blackwood never believed in softness, not in the way it looked in movies, not in whispered promises or candlelit dinners. To him, softness was a crack in the wall, and cracks meant collapse. He had built his life on precision, on structure, on control. Born and raised in Connecticut, he came from old money, but never relied on it. His father had been charming, admired, the kind of man who shook hands with 1,000 people and meant it for none. Ethan learned early that charm was a currency, and his father spent it too freely. When the truth came out about the affairs, the hidden debts, the second family across town, it wasn't loud. It was quiet. Quiet like the sound of his mother weeping behind a closed door. Ethan was 16. From that day on, he stopped believing in words that came too easily. He went to Harvard, graduated early, took Wall Street by the throat, and refused to let go. By 32, he had built Blackwood Capital into one of the most formidable firms in the country. He didn't smile much, didn't date publicly. His board members called him reliable. The media called him cold. The nickname stuck. The Iceman of Manhattan. He didn't care. Emotions, he believed, made people sloppy, vulnerable, open to loss. He'd seen what love did to his mother, how it unraveled her, left her frail, hollow. So Ethan made a choice. He would succeed. He would never need, and he would never, ever love. But there was one thing he couldn't avoid: image. Wall Street didn't care about affection, but it cared about perception. A single whisper of instability could make shareholders twitch, and Ethan's solitary life had begun to draw questions. Why wasn't he married? Why no public relationships? What was he hiding? At first, he ignored the murmurs. Then the board raised it, a quiet concern, a suggestion to settle, appear stable. You're the face of this company, Ethan. Investors want to trust the face. He didn't flinch. He never did. But that night, he sat in his penthouse, alone. The city sprawled out beneath him, and he felt the whisper of something foreign. Not fear, not loneliness, just emptiness. And then came the file. He hadn't expected her. The legal team had shortlisted a few candidates. Women from polite circles, trained for discretion, willing to play along. But one name stood out: Ava Warner. Not a socialite, not an heiress, a girl from a vineyard in California, widowed father, family debt, quiet record, no scandals. She hadn't applied. Someone in the legal office had suggested her after reading about the Warner Vineyard's decline. Ethan read her file twice, then asked for a meeting. She walked into his office wearing a navy coat and flats. Hair tied back simply. No makeup. No pretenses. She didn't fidget. Didn't flirt. She just sat there, across from him, and waited. What do you know about me? He asked. Enough, she said. Do you understand the terms? I read them. You don't have to agree. I know. He studied her. There was something in her voice, not meekness, not ambition, just resolve. And that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He didn't expect her to say yes, but she did. She signed without asking for changes, didn't negotiate, just paused for one moment before putting pen to paper. Ethan felt something stir in his chest then, sharp and sudden. He pushed it away. This is just structure, he told himself. It's math, stability. Still, when he watched her walk out of the office, coat clutched to her chest, something inside him whispered, she deserves more than this. He ignored it, because rules were how he survived, and he didn't break them, not even for himself. It didn't rain on the day Ava Warner became Mrs. Ethan Blackwood. There were no guests, no flowers, no music, just a signature and silence. The ceremony took place in a private room at the county courthouse, shielded from the press and the world. A judge, 2 lawyers, and a photographer who barely looked up from his camera. Ethan arrived 5 minutes early. His charcoal suit was sharp, his tie a perfect Windsor knot. He looked like a man headed to a shareholders' meeting, not a wedding. Ava stepped in exactly at noon. Her ivory dress didn't shimmer. It whispered. Simple lines. No veil. A pair of borrowed heels from her mother's closet. Their eyes met once. She nodded. He said nothing. The judge began reading. The words sounded like paperwork, not promises. Ava's hands trembled only once when she placed the ring on his finger. There was no kiss. There wasn't even applause. Just a quiet click of the camera shutter and the rustle of contracts being folded back into briefcases. They left in separate cars. It was Ethan's suggestion. No need for theatrics, he had said. Ava didn't argue. She had learned long ago that dignity often lived in silence. She watched the city blur past the car window. The skyline gleamed like glass blades against a blue sky. Somewhere beneath it all, people were falling in love. getting engaged, dancing at weddings. But in her world, love was a luxury she could no longer afford. Still, part of her hoped just a flicker that maybe he would say something that day. Something not in the contract. Something real. When she arrived at the estate, the staff greeted her with polite nods. No congratulations. Your suite is ready. Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper said. The room was beautiful, in the way hotel rooms are beautiful. Perfect. Cold. No sign of anyone who lived there. A bouquet of white roses sat on the nightstand, silent, scentless, ceremonial. She sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled. The contract had bought her time, safety, a future for her mother. But it had cost her something else, something she couldn't yet name. She opened the wardrobe. Dresses hung like strangers. Formal, expensive, nothing that smelled like home. She changed into a soft cotton sweater and jeans, something that still felt like her. Then she opened the window. Ethan watched the security feed from his study, not because he wanted to invade her privacy, but because he didn't know how else to be near her. He saw the way she stood at the window. Her back was straight, but her shoulders slumped like someone trying not to fall apart in front of no one. For a man who lived by numbers, it made no sense. She was a variable he hadn't accounted for. She wasn't fragile, but she wasn't guarded either. She had walked into this arrangement with eyes wide open, and yet something about her felt unbearably exposed. He had spent his entire life building walls, and she had walked through them without even trying. That evening, he sent a message through the housekeeper, dinner at 8. East Wing dining room. Formal attire. When Ava arrived, he was already seated at the far end of the long mahogany table, tapping notes on his tablet. He looked up when she entered. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then softly, "You look appropriate, not beautiful, not elegant, just appropriate." Ava sat down and nodded. The distance between them was more than physical. It was a silence wrapped in glass, too fragile to shatter, too thick to breathe through. Dinner passed with polite conversation. How was the room? Comfortable? Thank you. If you need anything, Mrs. Langley will see to it. She didn't expect more. But as she stood to leave, he surprised her. Ava, he said, his voice gentler. Tomorrow, I'll have the driver take you into the city. Buy what you need, anything that makes you feel more at home. She paused, searching his face for motive. Thank you, she said, quietly. Their eyes met, just for a second. And in that second, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't affection. Not yet. But it wasn't indifference either. That night, she didn't sleep right away. She stood by the window in her robe, looking out at the manicured gardens, the stone paths winding into moonlit stillness. Her heart was steady, but her thoughts spun like leaves in wind. She had signed the agreement with open eyes. But she hadn't expected him to be human, not kind, necessarily, but not cruel either. There had been a moment when he helped her into the car after the courthouse, where his hand lingered on hers just half a second too long. His touch had been cool, but not cold. Was that real? Or was that just wishful thinking from a woman who hadn't been touched in a long time in his room? Ethan sat alone, his tie loosened, his phone dark on the nightstand. He stared at the ceiling. He thought about her hand, small, soft, steady when it placed the ring on his finger, He thought about how she didn't flinch when the judge read the terms, how she didn't cry when she walked out alone. He had built this arrangement to avoid pain, to avoid mess, to avoid feeling anything at all. So why was his chest so tight now? He didn't know. All he knew was this: he couldn't stop thinking about the way she looked back at him across the table. Not with hope, not with fear, but with something far more dangerous: expectation. The clock struck midnight. Ava stood barefoot near the window. The soft cotton robe wrapped around her frame like a quiet kind of armor. Her hair was loose, falling in dark waves down her back, and her hands trembled not from cold, but from a restlessness she couldn't name. The garden outside was asleep, bathed in pale silver light. The marble fountains glistened under the moon, and somewhere beyond the hedges, wind rustled the ivy. Inside her chest, something stirred. She had expected this night to be lonely. She had prepared for it. But she hadn't expected her body to betray her peace. It wasn't longing. Not quite. It was a hunger for acknowledgement, for human nearness, for something that felt like warmth. And that scared her more than the silence. The knock came gently. Not Mrs. Langley. Slower. Lower. Hesitant. Ava turned. Her breath caught. The door opened just an inch. Then two. Ethan stepped inside. No jacket, just slacks and a crisp white shirt. Sleeves rolled up. Collar unbuttoned. No tie. No mask. He looked like a man who had wandered into a place he didn't belong. And for once, he didn't lead with confidence. "I should have called first," he said. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The air between them pulsed with something unspoken. He stepped forward slowly, closing the door behind him. His gaze swept the room, then landed on her face, and stayed. "You're not what I expected," he said. Ava tilted her head slightly. Is that a good thing he didn't answer? Not right away. His eyes dropped to her hands, which were clasped in front of her, tight with tension. Then lifted again. "I meant what I said at dinner. If there's anything you need to feel at home here, it's yours." She nodded faintly. "Safe. But not wanted." His jaw tensed. "That's not what you made the rules." "Ethan," she said softly. "No intimacy. No emotion. I signed the contract. I understand my place." "I know you do," he murmured. "But I'm beginning to wonder if I do." The silence that followed was thick, like fog pressing in around them. He moved, slowly, cautiously, until they stood just a few feet apart. "You shouldn't be alone on your wedding night," he said. Her eyes didn't waver. "We agreed." "I know." "Then why are you here?" He swallowed. "Because I can't stop thinking about the way you looked at me tonight." Her breath hitched. "And what did you see?" His voice dropped lower. Strength. Stillness. Something I haven't had in my life for a long time. They didn't move, but something did. Some invisible thread between them snapped loose, tangled. He took another step closer, and when his hand reached for hers, it didn't feel like permission. It felt like surrender. His fingers brushed hers gently, reverently. Ava didn't pull away. This wasn't a touch meant to possess. It was a question, and she, without words, gave her answer. When their lips met, it wasn't hungry. It was slow, uncertain, a collision of breath and fear and yearning. The kiss deepened, not with desire, but with something more dangerous: recognition. He kissed her like she was something sacred. She touched his face as if trying to memorize the shape of vulnerability. There was no urgency, no pretense, only two people, stripped of all the roles they had agreed to play, stepping into a moment neither of them planned. He led her to the bed, slowly, carefully, each movement deliberate, every button undone with permission, not entitlement, every inch of skin revealed like turning the page of a book that had never been opened before. And when they lay together, it wasn't about passion. It was about proximity, about letting go of armor, about allowing someone to see the parts of you that had been buried in contracts and silence. After, the room was quiet, not cold, not empty, just still. Ethan didn't roll away. He stayed close, one arm resting around her waist, his face buried in the curve of her shoulder. Ava kept her eyes open. She didn't speak. Because if she spoke, she might ask the question neither of them was ready to answer. What now? Was this a break in the rules, or the beginning of something they couldn't name? She fell asleep eventually. And when she woke, the space beside her was cold, empty, no note, no sound, just the soft hum of the house waking up without them. She sat up, clutching the sheet around her, staring at the spot where he had been. The pillow still held the shape of his head, but not the weight. Downstairs, the house moved like clockwork. Staff prepared breakfast. The gardener clipped ivy. The sky outside blushed with morning light, and in Ava's chest, the ache returned. She hadn't asked for love. She hadn't expected it. But he had come to her. He had kissed her like she mattered. He had stayed. Then he had left. And that somehow hurt, more than if he had never come at all. Ava didn't cry that morning. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, still wrapped in the sheet, watching sunlight crawl across the floor, like it was looking for something too. The silence was louder than usual, not empty, not cruel, just final. She got dressed, without rushing. The same soft cotton dress she liked because it didn't try too hard. She brushed her hair, pinned it back loosely, and went downstairs like a guest in someone else's house. No one mentioned Ethan. No one said. He left early. No one asked, "Did you sleep well?" Because that wasn't part of the arrangement. She wasn't his wife, in a way that invited breakfast conversations or morning glances over coffee. She was a presence, a formality, an elegant solution to a complicated problem. She spent most of the day walking through the garden. The air smelled like hydrangeas and cut grass. The stone paths curved around rose bushes, their petals drooping with dew. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the buzz of a mower. Routine continued, indifferent. She sat on a bench under a fig tree, the same one she had noticed from her window the first night. Birds flitted through the branches. Leaves danced, careless. Her hands rested on her lap. Still, too still. Inside her chest, everything screamed but quietly, like a child who had learned not to make noise when it hurt. That evening, Ethan didn't come to dinner. Mrs. Langley apologized with a practiced calm. "Mr. Blackwood is occupied with business matters. He asked me to extend his regards." Ava nodded. She ate alone. One course after another. She didn't taste anything. By dessert, she excused herself. The next few days passed like wallpaper, repeating, decorative, suffocating. He was always gone. Meetings, flights, calls. When he did return, it was late. No knock at her door, no shared glances. No mention of that night. He had closed the chapter before it was written. Ava stayed quiet. Not because she was afraid, but because silence had always been her strongest language. Until one morning, something broke. She woke with a tightness in her chest, a pressure that refused to be swallowed. She got dressed and walked. Not into the garden, not into the city, but through the east wing, an area of the house she hadn't explored. She moved through halls of oil paintings and echoing floors until she reached a door made of dark glass. It was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Inside was a forgotten room. Dust motes danced in the light streaming through high windows. In the center stood a long wooden table covered in cloths. Boxes and tools, rusted pliers, tiny chisels, worn gloves. There were trays of stones, some real, some costumes scattered like stories never told. Ava stepped inside. It smelled like metal and memory. She didn't know why, but her fingers itched. She lifted a tool, held it in her palm. Her father once had a small bench like this. He had repaired watch bands, crafted handmade corkscrews for wine events. She used to watch him work, the way his hands moved with care, the way he breathed through the silence. Ava sat down. The chair creaked beneath her, but held. And there, in that forgotten corner of someone else's mansion, she picked up a piece of copper wire and twisted. Hours passed. She didn't realize she had been crying until a teardrop hit the metal. Not sobbing, just slow, steady release. Grief she had never named. Disappointment she had tried to deny. Hope that had dared to bloom and been plucked too soon. But in her hands, something was forming, not perfect, not polished, but real. Her first piece, a clumsy little pendant with a tiny blue bead in the center, looked like nothing and everything. She held it up to the light. And for the first time since the wedding, she smiled. It wasn't wide, but it was hers. The next morning, she returned. And the next, and the next. The room became her sanctuary. Each piece she made was like a breath exhaled, a weight lifted, a story told without speaking. She crafted earrings, bangles, little brooches shaped like fig leaves, raindrops, crescent moons. She worked until her hands hurt, until her mind cleared, until the ache inside found a rhythm to live by. She didn't need to ask Ethan's permission. This room wasn't in the contract, and neither was healing. One afternoon, Mrs. Langley knocked gently. "I was looking for you. Mrs. Blackwood. The driver. He said you hadn't returned from town." "I've been here," Ava said softly. The older woman stepped inside. Her eyes widened. "My goodness," she murmured, taking in the small table now neatly arranged with finished pieces. "I didn't mean to take over the space," Ava said quickly. "Mrs. Langley smiled genuinely this time. "No one's used this room in years. It used to belong to Mr. Blackwood's grandfather. He made cufflinks, I believe." She picked up a pendant shaped like a keyhole. "This is lovely." Ava looked away. "It's a start. May I tell the staff you're here if anyone asks?" "Yes. Thank you." For the first time, Ava felt something shift, not in the house, but in her. She still saw Ethan sometimes across the hall, in passing cars, during brief encounters by the staircase. They nodded. They exchanged words like strangers who once shared something too fragile to speak of now. But she no longer waited for him. She no longer expected knockings in the night. Instead, she waited for metal to warm under her hands, for shapes to form, for silence to turn into creation. By autumn, the conservatory had changed. It no longer looked like a forgotten corner of a grand estate. It looked like a studio, a soul, a second chance. The table was organized with tiny compartments labeled in Ava's careful handwriting: glass, copper, findings, chains. Sketches were pinned to the wall, designs inspired by vines, seashells, broken wine corks. There was rhythm now in her days. Mornings began with tea and the gentle hum of the radio. Afternoons faded into hours of shaping, sanding, assembling. Nights were for writing notes, thoughts that became names for each piece. She called her collection Breath Between, a tribute to the space she had found between loss and living. One rainy morning, as the sky wept softly outside, Mrs. Langley brought her a package. No sender listed, the housekeeper said, placing it gently beside Ava's tools. Inside was a velvet box, and inside that an old necklace, worn. The chain frayed, the clasp rusted, but the pendant, a miniature gold feather, thin and weathered. Ava's breath caught. It was her father's. One of the few trinkets he'd ever bought for her mother. She turned it over. The engraving was still there. To see you, my soft place to fall. Claire Warner. Ava's throat tightened. How did this get here? She asked everyone. No one knew. Ethan wasn't home that week. She didn't ask him when he returned, but she knew. He had found it, and he had returned it not with fanfare, but with quiet precision. It wasn't an apology. It was a thread, and she wasn't sure whether to pull or let it lie. That week, she wore the feather pendant every day. It sat near her collarbone as she hammered and twisted wire, a silent reminder that grief, too, could be shaped. She made pieces inspired by her mother's lullabies. Others, shaped like vineyard leaves, wine stains, olive branches. There was one ring, sculpted from two twisted strands of silver. She called it Resolve. When she wore it, she felt like her hands belonged to someone who had learned how to survive without losing softness. It was Mrs. Langley who first suggested she show them. Just a few, the housekeeper said, to the right people. I'm not a designer, Ava whispered. You are now. The first woman she showed was Margot Langley, Mrs. Langley's niece, who ran a boutique in the city. Margot arrived on a Thursday, dressed in wide-legged trousers and a rain-colored blazer. Her eyes lit up the moment she entered the conservatory. This room smells like story, she said, fingers already trailing over the silver leaves and twisted glass drops. She tried on a pair of earrings, tiny vines with freshwater pearls. Who made these? She asked. I did, Ava replied. You sure? Ava laughed gently. Pretty sure. Margot looked at her, then not as a visitor, not as a wife, as an artist. 2 weeks later, the first private viewing was arranged. Not a grand show, just an intimate gathering of buyers and artists in a small Upper East Side gallery. Ava was terrified. She didn't have a brand, a website, a following, just her name, her pieces, her story. When she arrived, Nervous hands clutching a soft leather case, Margot greeted her with a smile. "You don't need noise," she said. "You need presence. You have that." The gallery smelled like new paint and perfume. Light jazz floated through the air. Ava's table was tucked in the corner, beneath a skylight. No neon signs, no slogans, just a small wooden placard. Ava Warner, breath between. The first woman who stopped to look at her work was older. Silver hair, deep-set eyes. She picked up a brooch shaped like two interlocking olive branches. "This one," she said. "It feels like forgiveness." Ava blinked. "That's what I called it." The woman smiled. "Then you're doing something right." By the end of the evening, she had sold 9 pieces. But more than that, she had spoken. She had told her story through shapes, metal, light. Not about the contract, not about Ethan. Just about what it meant to lose and still find something worth shaping. That night, as she returned to the estate, the driver opened the door without words. Ethan was home. His car was in the driveway, the study light still on. She paused at the base of the stairs, then turned. She didn't go to him. Not yet. Instead, she walked to her room, set her case gently on the bed, and sat down. She opened her journal and wrote 3 words: "I found her." The next morning, Ethan stood outside the conservatory. He didn't enter. He watched. Through the glass, he saw Ava bent over her workbench, hair tied back, the light touching her face like it belonged there. He saw joy, not loud or giddy, but calm, rooted, alive. He saw the kind of strength that didn't demand attention. It simply existed. He turned away before she noticed, because for the first time in years, he wasn't sure how to speak. He only knew how to watch, and to wonder, what would it feel like to be invited into a life like that, not as a husband by contract, but as a man with nothing left to offer except truth. It was Ethan's aunt, Margaret Blackwood, who first said it aloud, in front of guests, in front of Ava. "She's quite decorative, isn't she?" Ava was standing just a few feet away, holding a flute of sparkling water. Her dress was black velvet. Her earrings, 2 twisted pieces of copper shaped like infinity symbols. Ethan heard the words. He was mid-conversation with a board member when the sentence landed like a shard of glass in his chest. Decorative. Like wallpaper. Like a lamp. Like something placed, not chosen. The charity gala was being held at the Blackwood Foundation's Winter Hall, a gleaming glass structure in Midtown Manhattan. The room pulsed with polished small talk, the clink of glasses, the hum of money-wearing perfume. Ethan hadn't wanted Ava to attend, not because she didn't belong, but because he feared how others would treat her, because they didn't know her. They only knew what they assumed. She was the quiet wife, the vineyard girl, the woman who married into a name. And tonight, for the first time, that story was being challenged. Ava hadn't planned on making a statement, but Margot had convinced her to wear 3 of her new pieces. One brooch pinned to her waist shaped like a cracked pomegranate, a ring called Weightless, and the earrings, her favorite, named Still Here. Subtle, sharp, honest. The guests noticed, and they asked. And she spoke, softly, clearly, without apology. This one is about surviving grief. She told a woman in a gold gown, pointing to the pomegranate. Loss can look like beauty if you don't rush it. The woman blinked. "Did you design these? I made them." Ava said. Margot floated over and whispered, "They love you." Ava shook her head. "They love a version of me that fits this room." "No," Margot said, tilting her chin. "They love what you made. That's the version that matters. Across the room." Ethan watched. He hadn't seen her like this before. Not from the hallway, not through windows. But now, under chandeliers and judgmental eyes, she stood tall, elegant, still, radiant without trying. And for the first time, he felt the distance between them like a weight. He had built it, brick by brick, rule by rule, and now he didn't know how to cross it. The moment came unexpectedly. A reporter from a design magazine approached Ava near the gallery corner. "Your pieces have this lived-in pain," she said. "Were they inspired by something personal?" Ava hesitated. "Then yes. But I didn't design them to speak about pain. I designed them because no one else was saying anything real." The reporter smiled. "And how does your husband feel about your rising fame?" Ava blinked. She hadn't expected that. But before she could answer, Ethan stepped forward. "I'm proud of her," he said quietly, firmly. The reporter smiled wider. "You should be. She's not just the face behind your name. She's the story people want to hear." Ava turned to him. Their eyes met, and something passed between them like static before a storm. Later that night, back at the estate, Ava sat at the vanity, removing her earrings. Ethan leaned against the doorway. "I heard what Margaret said," he said. "She didn't respond. I should have said something." "You didn't have to," she murmured. "Yes, I did." A pause. "I'm sorry." She looked at him in the mirror. "Why are you sorry? For making you feel like a footnote in a contract?" She turned slowly. "I was, for a while." He nodded. "And now I don't know," she whispered. "But tonight, I felt like me again. Not your wife, not your asset. Just Ava. You were never just anything," he said. She stood, walked to him, stared up into his face. "Then why did you leave that night?" The question finally came. The one she had held like glass between her ribs for weeks. Ethan didn't flinch. "I was afraid," he said. "Of what? Of needing you." They stood in the dim hallway, moonlight spilling across the marble floor. Ethan's voice was quiet. "I spent my whole life believing that need was weakness, that love was loss waiting to happen. And now, I'm not sure what I believe." Ava stepped closer. "You don't have to believe anything yet," she said. "But if you want to know who I am, stop watching me from the doorway." He reached for her hand. And this time, she didn't pull away. It was raining the night Ava found him in the conservatory. She wasn't expecting to see him there. Ethan Blackwood, CEO of Precision and Calculation, standing at her workbench, fingertips grazing a sketch of her latest design. He looked like a man trespassing in a chapel. The rain tapped gently on the skylight above, and in the hush of the storm, his voice came soft. "This one's different," he said. She didn't answer right away. She simply stepped closer, her eyes tracing his eyes she once feared would never truly look at her. "I call it threshold," she said. "It looks unfinished." "It is." He turned to her. "Why?" "Because I haven't decided how it ends yet." Their eyes locked, and for the first time, there were no walls, no masks, no contracts standing between them. Only breath, only silence, only truth. Ethan stepped back, placing both hands flat on the table. "I've been standing on the edge of this room for weeks," he said. "Watching, listening, too afraid to come in. You're here now. I don't know how to be in this space." "You don't have to know," Ava replied. "You just have to want to be here." A pause. "I do," he whispered. She walked to the corner of the room and picked up the twisted silver ring. Resolve. The very first piece she had made after the night he left her bed, cold. She held it out. "This was born from silence," she said. "From the night you walked away without saying goodbye." He took the ring in his hand, turned it slowly. "I didn't know how to stay," he said, "not after feeling something real. I didn't ask you to feel anything. I know. That's what made it terrifying." Ethan looked up, eyes darker than usual, like a storm was blooming inside. "I grew up thinking love was a transaction, a risk, something that always ends in abandonment or betrayal. My parents had something else," Ava said. "Not perfect, but true. My mother still speaks to my father's chair." He smiled faintly. "That sounds like love. She says it's the only place she still hears him. Do you hear me in this room?" Her breath caught. "Sometimes. And what do I say? That you're waiting for permission?" He stepped closer. "Permission? For what? To stop surviving and start living." The moment stretched, long and quiet. Ethan held the ring tightly. "I kept thinking that the rules would protect us, that if we never crossed the line, we'd never have to feel the fall. But we already did," Ava said, "and we're still here." He reached out, gently, and took her hand. "I don't want to go back to the rules." "Then don't. I don't want this to be a contract anymore. It hasn't been for a while." They stood in the center of the room, surrounded by pieces of a life Ava had rebuilt from silence. He touched the sketch of threshold again. "Finish it with me?" She smiled. "Only if you help bend the silver." He nodded. "Deal." That night, for the first time, Ethan didn't retreat to his separate suite. They sat in the conservatory for hours, barefoot, cross-legged on the floor, talking like people who were no longer trying to win or defend. He told her about his father's betrayal. She told him about her father's kindness. He told her he feared being truly seen. She told him she saw him anyway. He kissed her again, not as a businessman, not as a husband by contract, but as a man finally choosing to be vulnerable. And she let him. Fully. In the following weeks, everything changed. Subtly, quietly, but deeply. Ethan began showing up at the conservatory in the mornings, sometimes just watching her shape metal, other times sketching with her. He built a small cabinet for her tools by hand. It was uneven. The drawers stuck, but Ava loved it more than any gift he could have bought. They laughed more. They sat in the garden at dusk. They read aloud from old books and argued gently about endings. The contract, now tucked away in a drawer, gathered dust. They didn't need it anymore. What they had now wasn't an arrangement. It was a beginning. One evening, as they sat beneath the fig tree in the garden, Ava placed something small in Ethan's palm, a silver cufflink. Simple, understated, elegant. But on the underside, an inscription to E.B. for crossing the line. He looked up, his throat tightening. "You made this for me. I made it for the man who stopped watching and stepped in." He closed his fingers around it. Then he looked at her and said something she never thought she'd hear. I love you, Ava. Her heart cracked open, not with pain, but with release. And with a voice steady and sure, she replied, I know. Spring returned to the Blackwood estate like a second chance. The vines in the garden twisted higher along the brick walls. The fig tree began to bloom again. This time with Ava's handmade wind chimes swaying gently from its branches, each one crafted from spare silver and glass shards once broken, now singing. And in the conservatory, the morning light fell not just on tools and sketches, but on 2 cups of coffee, one with cinnamon, the other black. No more silence, no more separate mornings, no more pretending. Ava stood in the doorway, watching Ethan tinker with the drawer he'd built months ago. It still stuck a little, but she never asked him to fix it. She loved it that way, slightly imperfect, always honest. He turned to her, holding one of her designs. It was the threshold piece now finished. He'd helped bend the silver. She'd carved the stone. Together, they'd inscribed one word inside choose. Ethan handed it to her. You should show this one next. She looked at him, her smile calm. I think I will. The gallery where she debuted the Full Breath Between collection was small but luminous. Margot helped organize everything, from the velvet-lined displays to the soft jazz playing in the background. This time, Ava stood not in the corner, but in the center. People came from across the city, designers, writers, even strangers who had read about her work and said, I felt something. I don't know what, but I felt it. That was enough. She didn't want to impress. She wanted to connect, and she did, not through perfection, but through presence. Ethan stayed in the background that night, not because he was hiding, but because he knew she no longer needed anyone to speak for her. He watched her laugh freely, speak clearly, stand fully. At one point, a reporter asked him, What do you think your wife's work means to people? Ethan answered without pause. I think it reminds them that broken isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's where the light gets in. The reporter smiled. That's beautiful. Did you come up with it? He shook his head. No. She did. I'm just quoting her. A few weeks later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. It was from Claire Warner, Ava's mother. It had taken months of support, therapy, and consistent care. But Claire's memory had begun to return in small waves. In her letter, she wrote, My sweet girl, your father would be proud of you not for surviving, but for living with softness still in your hands. I see you now in the papers, in photos, but I remember you best under vineyard vines, barefoot, strong. Keep shaping light into things people can wear. The world needs more of that. Love. Mom Ava read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it and placed it inside the drawer that stuck. It belonged there, like all the things that made her who she was. One quiet evening, Ava and Ethan sat on the back porch, watching fireflies rise like sparks from the grass. They didn't speak for a long while, not because there was nothing to say, but because peace had settled between them. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Do you regret it? She asked softly. The contract. No, she said. All of it. How it began. What it cost. He thought for a long moment, then turned to her, brushed a strand of hair from her face. I think it took the wrong beginning to find the right truth. She smiled. Me too. They never had a second wedding, no fanfare, no vows rewritten. They just started showing up in each other's lives in small ways every day. That was their ceremony. That was their commitment. And years later, when the conservatory was expanded to become a full studio and the Blackwood name quietly merged with Warner Artisan Design, people asked if they'd always planned it this way. Ava would laugh gently and say, "Not at all." And Ethan would add, "Some of the best stories start with a contract and end with a choice." In the end, it wasn't love that saved them. It was the choice to try, to listen, to stay, and to believe. Even after silence and distance and rules, that there could still be light worth staying for. In life, we often face choices that don't look like freedom, but are. Ava's story reminds us that even when circumstances feel imposed, we still hold the power to respond with grace, patience, and quiet strength. Sometimes, love doesn't begin with fireworks. It begins with respect, with space, with the courage to stay soft in a world that taught us to harden. As we grow older, we carry stories of heartbreak, regret, and maybe silence, just like Ava. But her journey reminds us healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about shaping something beautiful from it, like she shaped silver with steady hands. Even if love comes late, even if it's quiet, it's still worth choosing. And sometimes, the most powerful vows aren't spoken at the altar, but in the way we show up for each other every single day. So take heart. It's never too late to begin again. Thank you for spending your time with us and walking alongside this story of quiet strength and second chances. If Ava and Ethan's journey moved something in your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Your support helps us continue bringing meaningful stories that heal, inspire, and connect us all. We can't wait to share the next story with you.